Hello, everyone, and welcome into another episode of the Go 24/7 podcast. Back home from Nashville, Glen, West, Bryce, Koon. We survived the drive. Glenn, it was looking a little. I guess I'm going to say this word. I don't know how many times we're going to use this word in a podcast. Peckish. There for a little bit because the weather outside of Nashville was awful. We hit the Alabama state line and it was quite nice, but hey, we're back and we're rocking and rolling just in time for a big recruiting weekend. We're going to have great coverage of that all week and weekend long. It's a good reason to stay tuned to the channel. Make sure you subscribe, like, and set up those notifications. Glenn, big commitment came in this past weekend, kind of took all of us a little bit by surprise. I think it took everyone who covered LSU, the timing of it, not necessarily that it happened, but the timing. Tylen Singleton commits to LSU. It's another big in-state pickup. A kid from obviously from Manny as well, that comes to Baton Rouge and gets to kind of play into the idea of playing at home. He talked about that with obviously Sonny Ship. It's a great VIP article folks should check out. But Glenn, your reactions to this pickup and why it's a big one for this 2024 class.
Yeah, I mean, look, you get another top 10 player in the state of Louisiana. He's currently the number 10 linebacker in the composite rankings for 24/7 Sports, number 140 player overall. So you're getting a pretty high four-star prospect here, a guy who I think can probably fill a couple different roles for you if you're LSU in this class, depending on what your needs are. I think he certainly fits the mold of a linebacker and somebody who can play close to the line of scrimmage. But I think he can also probably play a little bit of safety, maybe at that nickel position. Once he gets on campus, he's about, I want to say 6 foot, like 205, 210. He's really, a great physical athlete and somebody who I think could be pretty diverse for Matt House and for this offense or for this defense on the field. But what really kind of, I think, stood out to me with this whole pickup was LSU had not really recruited that area of Louisiana in the last class. They had Tackett Curtis, who was a big-time linebacker who ended up signing with USC last year. So to go back into that area, not kind of give up on it and locate Singleton, get in on him early. I know that Matt House played a huge role in all this. Sherman Wilson, Frank Wilson, Joe Sloan, all those guys played a hand in getting Singleton on board. And I think it's just another really great addition here in state. Another guy that, I think LSU can build around locally. And look, I think probably the other part of this that kind of ties into it is that LSU, you mentioned it, has recruited the state extremely, extremely well in this recruiting cycle. You've got 8 of the top 10 players in the state committed to LSU. The only other 2 that aren't committed are not committed anywhere right now. So they're still in on LSU too. So I think that kind of the mold of what LSU has been when they've been at their best has been building through Louisiana players and getting the right Louisiana talent on board. You go back to 17, 18, 19 when a lot of that core was together. The Justin Jeffersons, the Jamar Chases of the world, Derek Stingley Jr. Early in his career. LSU was recruiting 6, 7, or 8 of those top 10 Louisiana players year in and year out. And it had kind of gotten away from that a little bit over the last couple of years, and just in the coaching transition and just kind of having some up and down seasons. So the fact that they're getting back on that track and really putting a lot of effort and consistency into recruiting the Louisiana players, I think is resonating, and you're seeing it here. I think getting Singleton on board here before that Bayou Splash event, which we'll get into a little bit later, just having another voice there to help with some of those uncommitted players that you're still going to be going after during this recruiting cycle. It's just another really, really great addition, and I think it's something that's going to help LSU here in the long run.
Yeah, going back to Singleton, when you watch this kid's film, you see why, what you mentioned. This is a guy that can play a lot of different spots, and he can be a hybrid guy. And Glenn, I thought it was interesting as I was kind of looking at this class. I mean, you have Singleton. We've got him sitting 6'1", 208, so he's in that range, kind of that 6'1", 205 to 210 range. You obviously know this kid's going to put on more weight when he gets down to campus and gets into kind of the nutrition and the weight program. But you got him. You got McBride, the safety out of Denham Springs, who's similar build, 6'2", 200. You've still got a guy like Joel Rogers, 6 foot 180. But you've got a lot of guys in this class, and that's just three. And I'm going to kind of look here just to make sure. Xavier Atkins, another one, 6'2", 215. It's not your big, bulky linebackers that you and I grew up on. You know, the guys that are the big thumpers. It's a lot of sideline to sideline speed to kind of counter. You're seeing that trend in this class. But I think what's exciting, and we can talk about this, is Matt House is kind of identifying here guys that are interchangeable, guys that you can put in different spots, and the versatility in that linebacker to safety role. How do you see that playing out on this roster with 4 or 5 guys in this class that really could play safety, linebacker, or kind of that hybrid role?
Yeah, I think it's a big emphasis here. I think that they're trying to find athletes more so than anything, and they're going to plug those athletes into what spots they feel they fit best in once they get on campus. I think Deshaun McBride is another example of that. He's about 6'2", 200 pounds. Currently, like your number one recruit right now in this class. He's just shot up a bunch of
Yeah.
boards over the last several months because of the frame that he's starting to build here going into his senior season. So yeah, I mean, I think it's really important. Kalaj Cobbins is another example of that, a guy who could probably play a little bit of edge, maybe drop back in coverage a little bit for you as well. I think that they're identifying some of these guys that can play potentially multiple roles for you. I like that kind of strategy of being able to just get the athlete on campus first, develop them, and see what kind of player they turn into, what kind of position best suits them. I just think it's a really good way for LSU to kind of just take what is given to them and kind of recruit the state well, do what's right for the state in this recruiting class. And you've got 19 commits right now. I would imagine that they certainly keep the pedal to the metal here on a lot of high
Mhm.
5-star players, 4-star players. I think the end of this class is really going to be defined by how they close on some of those national prospects, and certainly on the 2 Louisiana guys, Wardell Mack, Dominic McKinley. You want those two as a part of this class as well. And this week is going to be a really important step, I think, in that. And we can dive into that a little bit later. But just getting back to like the kind of athlete that LSU is recruiting here, it's deliberate. And I think the fact they kind of have these linebacker safety hybrid kind of roles or kind of evaluations right now is only going to make it easier for LSU, because I think that you can plug these guys in once you get them on campus, once you beef them up a little bit and develop them, and just see what position best fits them.
Yeah, it's a situation, and Glenn, I just wanted to give you the full screen there for a second. That was the reason I ducked out. No, I'm just kidding. We had some technical difficulties. That's okay though. But you mentioned obviously the ability to kind of interchangeably use these guys. I think it's valuable skill to have, especially when you get into the SEC play. You add 2 teams in Texas and Oklahoma that have good. Texas has a good offensive mind, and Steve Sarkisian, guys that are going to want to spread it out. They're going to use speed, and it gives you a chance to not lock yourself in my opinion, to a defensive scheme or players that are going to fit the scheme that may not fit the best scheme for that week. Like if you're playing a team that loves to get rid of the football, loves to throw it down the field, one team I'm thinking of is like a team like Ole Miss. It's got a lot of speed, who's going to really try to stretch the field. Guys like this is what you're going to want to recruit. If you're playing a team a little more physical, at Georgia and Alabama, a team like that, you're going to have to beef up some guys. So I think they're recruiting really well. And it brings me to the question here. You talked about in-state, 8 of the top 10. We're going to see where these other guys, Wardell Mack, Dominic McKinley, is a guy that's been linked obviously to LSU a lot. But the importance of locking down this state, is it more of a situation, and you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, is it more of a situation of LSU got away from it and they're trying to reestablish that before really ramping up maybe out-of-state stuff, going forward? I know they hit on some out-of-state stuff last year. Or is this more just a case of, hey, there's some really good talent here, and we're going to lock up these guys and then maybe pick and choose, be a little more picky out-of-state? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think probably the thing that's been different maybe about this class is that so many of those players in state have kind of had a meteoric rise, kind of late
Mm.
into the process here. I mean, you look at McBride, was a guy that was not really on the radar of a lot of schools. LSU found him, and now he's a top 100 player. Certainly Jawan Johnson's a guy who's kind of steadily risen up the rankings as well. Kylan Billiot is a receiver that LSU got just last month after bringing him in for a workout. And man, I don't know how. I mean, maybe he just really bloomed late, but there were. I watched that workout. We were at those camps, and he definitely stood out like a sore thumb. I mean, he is an electric athlete, 6'3", nearly 200 pounds. Has really done a nice job of kind of building out his frame as well. He's a top 100 player now on 24/7 Sports. So, like, I mean, they've found a lot of, I think, diamonds in the rough here recently, which is why they've recruited so well in state. But I do think that you're going to have to land the big fish to really feel good about this class. McKinley and Mack, certainly you want to round that out. I don't know if this has ever happened. I think you'd probably have to go back to the very beginning of the recruiting services to do the research on that. But I don't believe LSU's ever landed the top 10 players out of Louisiana. Usually there's,
Wow.
usually there's, an Alabama or a Texas or a Texas A&M or Ole Miss or somebody that comes in and grabs one of those players, just because usually there's a redundancy at the position, and LSU's maybe taking another player that's also in the top 10 that plays the same position. So I think it's just kind of worked out really well for LSU that, a lot of these guys can play, like we said, they can be a little bit more diverse. They can play a little bit of different roles, and they're a little bit set up positionally to really take on a lot of those players. And I think LSU's in a good position here to potentially land, McKinley and Mack. I mean, Mack, you're going to have to do a little bit more work on. I think there's a lot of buzz right now that he could go out of state, but McKinley is certainly a guy they're going to keep on. Both of those guys don't really, offer up a whole ton in terms of just like updates on their recruitment and interviews and whatnot. So it's going to be a little bit tough. But I think, an event like this where you're able to get a lot of your commits, a lot of other uncommitted prospects, in the same place at the same time, having fun, chopping it up with the coaching staff, with your family members, getting to know each other. It's just a really good atmosphere to kind of, cut down some of those, those walls that are up, on some of those players that are doing a lot of thinking at this time of year. And it's going to be a really good opportunity for LSU, I think, to land one, if not both of those guys. And if they do it, it'd be a pretty historic, I believe, moment for LSU in the recruiting department.
Yeah, that'd be a cool research project. I mean, has that ever happened? And I'd love to see if that happened to any program. Top 10 to be able to do that.
Yeah, I went back to 17, just kind of looking at it, and there was always, one or two players, three players sometimes that went out of state, or that LSU just didn't really offer or get in on, just wanted to go in a different direction kind of thing. And I think that just says a lot about this class and the kind of person and talent that they think that Louisiana is putting out in this 2024 cycle. LSU's really been jumping on a lot of these guys, making them priorities, and you're seeing that kind of in the results right now as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned it with a guy like Billy Ott as well. I mean, a guy that got on campus and they were able to see with their own eyes in a workout. Another one, Michael Turner Jr., just a couple weeks later, that they were able to get. So it's guys that they're getting eyes on, and I think that's where you kind of have to default to trust that support staff. You have to trust the position coaches that are bringing in saying, hey, we need to offer this kid, and then obviously Kelly's signing off on just that. But it leads me to this weekend, and we've teased it, we've talked about it. We're going to have a really in-depth podcast later on the week with Sonny Ship about this. But Glenn, I wanted to get your thoughts on this as well, because it is a big weekend. There's no doubt about it. There's been kind of a mixed bag from the fan base on how they feel about this recruiting class. We've kind of painted, I would say, with the optimistic brush here, what they've done inside the state. But there's some big names headed to campus. Obviously, a lot of commits, but on the uncommitted front, you have guys like Simmons, Wardell Mack that we talked about. Caden Durham is another one. Dominic McKinley is obviously another major priority. But when you look at some of these names, and you mentioned it with this weekend, how important is this weekend for LSU? And is it a make or break weekend? I mean, when you look at kind of what they're doing, I mean, Caden Durham's a guy that, I wrote about this last week. They're looking at potentially 3 backs in that 2025 class, but they're really kind of all in on Caden Durham in this 2024 class. What does it look like from this point? And if they miss on this, I mean, where do they pivot in your opinion, or do they pivot anywhere? Is it just a portal edition and wait for 2025?
Yeah, so there's a lot of questions in there. I probably will want to start with just this weekend as a whole. I think that probably this event is bigger for some prospects than others. I think LSU, really, I think is going to, lean heavily on getting these guys in for games and maybe making a final push, through a weekend game at home and in their stadium kind of thing. I think that's certainly a case you could look at for a guy like Colin Simmons, who maybe isn't super close to announcing. He's still he floated it out there last week that he's gotten a commitment date coming soon, but that commitment date could be at any time, and we don't really know when he's thinking or what that looks like. So, I think that probably the biggest one is going to be Durham, just because he's announced his commitment is going to be August 25th. It's going to be before the football season starts and all that stuff, and so you get him on campus, you get his teammate Simmons on campus, and look, I think another great factor in all this is that Durham was on campus last month unofficially.
Yeah.
He paid to come here on his own dime last month, and now that he's coming back a month later, it's going to be one of his final visits. It looks like it's going to be LSU and A&M, I believe, are getting visits here to kind of close out July. So I think it's going to come down to LSU, A&M, and Oklahoma. Oklahoma just got the commitment from the number one running back in the country. We'll see how that maybe affects Durham's thinking, but LSU's going all in on him. I mean, I wrote about it too late last week as well, or maybe it was over the weekend, just kind of in particular how unique of a case that is for him, just because LSU's pouring all of its resources and efforts into him. I mean, like, he is the guy that LSU is going after at that spot. And LSU, Frank Wilson has a really great track record. Sherman Wilson also is doing a great job recruiting Durham as well. Those two have really been kind of fueling those efforts. They have great relationships with his family. He's been on campus multiple times in the last several months. He'll be on campus again, obviously, later this week. We'll see what happens there, but I like LSU's spot. I mean, I think if you asked A&M reporters or if you asked Oklahoma reporters, they'd tell you that they like where they're at with Durham. And I believe the same thing about LSU. I think they've done a really good job of recruiting him. And we'll see kind of what comes of these last couple of visits. And if the tide starts to change coming out of the weekend, whether it's towards LSU or A&M or Oklahoma, we'll get a much better kind of affirmation on that after the weekend. But like I said, having all these guys in the same place at the same time, you can make your one last pitch to a guy like Durham, who's going to be making his decision pretty soon. Blake Ivy's another guy who's going to be here, another high 4-star player. You got Simmons obviously coming in as well. So there's a good group of uncommitted prospects that I think LSU wants to. Out-of-state uncommitted prospects. I mean, McKinley and Mack are also coming in as well. But there's a good chunk of players here that I think LSU is going to have a chance to make a final pitch to. Got a chance to talk to Colin Hurley a little bit earlier this week as well. He, was going through some summer school stuff and trying to make sure that he's not only eligible for 2024, but that he can enroll early. So he's hard at work, but he's going to make the trip in as well. And always, having that quarterback of the class kind of leading the charge is always a good thing for you as well. So, I would say it's a pretty important weekend for LSU. I mean, I don't know that it's going to be a make or break for every uncommitted prospect that's here this weekend. I think LSU is going to be able to get most of those guys back on campus before they make their decision sometime during the season. So we'll see what happens. But it's going to be a biggie for sure.
Yeah, you mentioned Hurley, a bunch of the guys, Michael Turner, Joe Rogers, Demyron Johnson, Jawan Johnson, Trades Green, McBride, Burrell, Burrow, Cobbins, Billiott, and Foster, and Kary Lee as well. So a lot of guys, too, that bodes well, that are saying, hey, we want to be on campus because we know it's a big weekend. We've seen the social media pushes as well for a lot of these guys, and you obviously kind of hope that it trends LSU's way with a lot of these names being put out there. But, Glenn, I think it's going to be an exciting weekend, obviously, to monitor, and the best way to do that is to head over to Go 24/7, get that VIP subscription, get in on the message board conversations. Sonny ship with some great recruiting tips. Glenn and I, the young bucks, learning from Sonny. We're providing some great stuff as well, and obviously continuing. Glenn, you just put up a great free piece this morning, staying kind of recruiting, but switching sports, baseball wise. Keep an eye on that date because maybe some names continue to drop for the LSU through the transfer portal as that massive roster shuffle. Glenn, we thought football roster construction was crazy. I think college baseball roster construction might be a little more crazy with a sense of all these deadlines and the different periods that you can see these names fall. But it's going to be a lot of fun to kind of monitor as well. Hey, that's all we have the time for today on the Go 24/7 podcast. My name is Bryce Koon. That is Glen West. Make sure you like the video. Make sure you subscribe and set up those notifications. And if you're listening on audio, Spotify or Apple Podcast or wherever you get this podcast, we appreciate you. We want to make sure you're tuned in for the next one. So make sure you like, follow, subscribe, and set up notifications so you know when we drop the latest content. We'll catch you next time here on the Go 24/7.